I have been serving as a park ranger for a long time now, well over 15 years. Most of my work has been out in places that folks would call the middle of nowhere. I am talking about the kind of country where the forest stretches on for miles without a single sign of human life, where the nights are so quiet, you swear you can hear the trees breathing. People often imagine that sort of wilderness as peaceful, almost like a big outdoor church. But after years of walking those trails and patrolling lonely campgrounds, I can tell you it is not always that simple. The woods hold secrets, and some of them are dark. There is one memory that still has the power to shake me, no matter how many times I try to tell myself to let it go. It happened a few years back, and ever since then, the way I look at the wilderness has never been the same. At the time, I was assigned to a large national park, tucked deep into the forest, far away from the nearest highway or town. It was the kind of place where you could go for days without crossing paths with another soul. The season was late fall, the kind of weather where the cold starts settling in for good. Visitor numbers always dropped around then. We had a few scattered campgrounds open, mostly the kinds of spots that attracted people who loved solitude, serious hikers, nature photographers, and folks just looking to get away. But with that quiet came risk. In those conditions, someone could get lost easily. Or worse, someone with bad intentions might decide to take advantage of the seclusion. One evening in November, the temperature had already dropped low enough to make your breath hang in the air. I was out on my usual patrol, slowly working my way down the narrow gravel roads that wound between the campsites. The sun had dipped below the tree line, leaving behind a pale blue glow, and the wind made the branches groan as it moved through them. My truck's headlights lit up the twists of the road and the dark wall of trees on either side. That was when I came upon something that set my nerves on edge. One of the campsites, one of the more isolated ones, had a camper parked there. An older recreational vehicle, the kind that had clearly seen better days. Now, people did bring campers into the park from time to time, but this one was parked way off the main track, tucked back into the trees as though whoever drove it there wanted to keep it hidden. At first, I figured maybe it was just someone wanting a bit of privacy. That happened sometimes, and usually it was nothing to worry about. Still, something about the way it was positioned felt off to me, almost like it had been placed there on purpose out of sight. I pulled my truck up alongside it and gave the horn a good honk, just to announce myself and see if anyone stirred. Nothing. I waited, gave it another honk, and still, not a sound. No one came to the window, no one stepped out. I killed the engine, climbed out of my truck, and walked toward the camper, calling out, "Park ranger here. Just checking in? Anybody home?" Again, no answer. That was when I noticed the door. It was not shut all the way, just barely open, rocking in the wind with a low creak. That gave me a cold feeling I could not shake. I knocked gently on the frame, calling once more, "You all right in there?" Still silence. Finally, I leaned down and peered through the half-open door, expecting maybe to find someone asleep on the couch or just too tired to bother answering me. What I saw instead made my stomach knot instantly. A man sat inside, perfectly still, planted on the couch like a statue. His head did not turn, his body did not move. His clothes looked like he had been living rough, wrinkled, dirty, hair unkempt. From where I stood, I could not make out the expression on his face, but something in the stillness told me it was not right. I called out to him again, louder this time. "Sir, you okay?" He did not flinch, did not even blink. The silence was deafening, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. That was enough for me to pull out my radio and call my dispatcher, telling them I had a situation at one of the remote campsites. While I kept my eyes on the man through the dim window, trying to make sense of it, I suddenly heard something behind me, the sound of footsteps in the gravel. I spun around, my heart jumping into my throat. Out of the darkness stepped another man, not from the camper but from deeper in the campground. He looked like just another visitor, concerned, maybe even cautious. "Everything all right here?" he asked. His voice startled me, and for a moment I wondered how I had not noticed him before. I told him quickly what I had found, that there was a man inside the camper who was not responding to me. The newcomer frowned, eyeing the RV like it was a snake coiled in the grass. "That's strange," he said, his voice uneasy. "That camper's been parked here for a couple of days now, but I never saw anyone move around it." I stood there with that stranger beside me, both of us staring at the camper like it was some kind of trap ready to spring. The longer I watched the man inside, the less alive he seemed. He sat so stiff, so unnatural, that a cold unease spread through me. I remember the other camper whispering, "There's no way he could have gotten in there without someone noticing." The words didn't make sense at first, but they added fuel to the pit of dread already burning in my gut. I nodded, told him I had already called for backup, and suggested we keep our distance until more help arrived. Together we stepped back from the RV, keeping our eyes on that open doorway. The air around us grew heavier by the minute, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The wind rattled through the trees, and I could feel every muscle in my body coiled tight, waiting for something to happen. Not long after, headlights broke through the darkness. Another ranger rolled up, and with him came a deputy from the county sheriff's office. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with a new tension. Whatever was inside that camper, we were about to face it. We approached as a group, flashlights cutting across the trees, beams landing on the half-open door. The man inside still had not budged an inch. My voice felt like gravel in my throat when I called out again. "Sir, we're coming inside." When we stepped through the doorway, the smell hit me first. Metallic, sharp, unmistakable. The smell of blood. I saw it smeared across the floorboards, dark and thick, pooling near the couch where the man sat frozen in that unnatural pose. My stomach lurched. Beside the couch, just inches from his limp hand, was a hunting knife. The blade glistened under the weak glow of our flashlights, coated in dried stains that left no doubt what it had been used for. Then I finally saw his face. It hardly looked human anymore. His features were swollen, bruised, and beaten so badly it was difficult to recognize him as a living person. His eyes were wide open, staring off at nothing, glassy and empty. The deputy muttered something under his breath and immediately stepped back out the door to radio for a forensic team. The other ranger followed him, pale as a ghost. I lingered for a second, forcing myself to look, to take in every detail, because I knew this scene would follow me whether I wanted it to or not. We regrouped outside in the cold night air. The camper who had first approached me looked shaken to his core. His voice trembled when he said he had noticed the RV parked for at least 2 days, but he had not thought much of it. He admitted he had heard noises in the night, sharp bangs or heavy footsteps, but figured it was just the wind or an animal brushing against the siding. As we pieced it all together, the picture became clearer and far more disturbing. This was not an accident. The man in that RV had been the victim of a violent crime. Someone had beaten him, maybe tortured him, and then left him there like garbage, with the door hanging open, and the wilderness to swallow the rest. The worst part was realizing that whoever had done this might still be out there, maybe even watching us as we stood there under the thin glow of flashlights. That thought made my skin crawl. The hours that followed were long and grueling. More rangers arrived. Deputies combed the area. We searched every trail, every abandoned path, every possible hiding place, looking for signs of whoever was responsible. The RV itself yielded little besides the blood and the knife. No clear fingerprints or notes, nothing to point us in the right direction. It took days before the break finally came. A man, a drifter known to hang around the edges of small towns not too far from the park, was spotted living out of a broken-down shack in the woods. He matched the description of someone we had heard about. Trouble with the law before, angry, unpredictable. When the deputies questioned him, the truth began to seep out like poison. He admitted that the victim had been someone he knew, someone who owed him money. What started as a confrontation over that debt spiraled into violence. In his rage, he beat the man to death and tried to hide the crime by leaving him inside that camper, believing the remoteness of the site would keep him safe from discovery. But nothing stays hidden forever. The arrest was quick once he confessed, and the park was once again declared safe for visitors. But safe is not really the right word. The image of that man sitting lifeless on the couch, those glassy eyes fixed on nothing, stayed with me. They still do. I have spent most of my career training for the dangers of the wild. Sudden storms, wild animals, hikers getting lost in unforgiving terrain. But that night taught me something far more chilling. That the true danger in the wilderness does not always come from the weather or the wildlife. Sometimes it comes from people. Even now, years later, when I drive past a lonely RV parked in the trees, my chest tightens. I feel that same unease creeping up my spine. I cannot help but wonder what secrets might be sitting behind those thin metal walls. What shadows might be hiding inside. The forest can feel too still at times, almost like it is keeping secrets. And ever since that November night, I have known deep down that the darkest things lurking out here are not the bears or the wolves. It is us. There are nights in the wilderness that stick with you forever, no matter how many years pass. I can still see the glow of that campfire and hear the faint whistle of the wind moving through the pines like it happened yesterday. We were deep in the backcountry on a routine patrol, just 3 rangers sitting in a small circle with the fire throwing light across our faces. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles, sharp and clean, almost too still, like the world itself had gone quiet to watch us. I remember leaning back, feeling the heat of the flames on my boots, while we traded stories in hushed voices. It was the kind of talk you have only in the woods, half joking, half thoughtful, a way of passing the hours while keeping one ear tuned to the sounds of the forest. We had been at it a while when I noticed Ranger Mike stiffen. His whole body went rigid, his eyes narrowing into the dark beyond the firelight. "You guys hear that?" he whispered, his voice low, careful, like even the crackling fire might drown it out. Sarah and I froze. I tilted my head, straining my ears, but at first all I caught were the usual night sounds. The rustle of leaves, a cricket chirping, maybe the creak of a branch. Then it came, a sound so deep it seemed to crawl up from the ground itself, a growl, low and guttural, that rolled through the trees and settled right into my bones. It was not just a noise, it was a vibration that shook me in a way no wild animal ever had. "Bear," I muttered, though even as I said it, something about the sound made me doubt my own words. Still, instinct kicked in. My hand went straight to my belt where I carried a canister of bear spray. "Stay close to the fire," I told them, trying to sound steadier than I felt. The growl came again, this time louder, closer. The hair on my arms stood up. Sarah's flashlight quivered in her grip as she flicked it on, the beam cutting weakly into the darkness. Suddenly the fire, which had seemed so warm and welcoming a few minutes before, looked small. Just a flicker against the endless black pressing in around us. Then came the sharp snap of a branch breaking somewhere behind us. We all whipped around, flashlights slicing through the forest, beams bouncing off thick trunks and low brush. My throat was dry, and I had to swallow hard before I could get words out. "Did you hear that too?" Sarah's voice shook, though I could tell she already knew the answer. I nodded. The sound of a snapping branch might not mean much in daylight, but out there in the dark, after hearing that growl, it felt like a warning. Whatever it was big, and it was close. "We need to move," I said quietly but firmly. "Pack up, quick and quiet." We worked fast, shoveling dirt and water onto the fire until it hissed out, leaving us in a blanket of shadows. Every sound we made, the crunch of leaves under our boots, the clatter of gear shoved into packs, seemed to echo through the trees. And still the growls kept coming, sometimes faint, sometimes closer, never fading entirely. "Which way?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Back toward the trail," I told her. "Stay close, keep your lights up, and do not stop." The 3 of us moved in a tight line, stumbling over roots and rocks that grabbed at our feet in the dark. Branches snagged at our jackets and scratched at our arms. My heart pounded in my chest, not from the exertion, but from the feeling that something unseen was following just beyond the edges of our light. "We're losing it," Sarah gasped after a while, her breath coming fast. Don't stop, I urged, pushing forward though my own legs burned. We're not safe yet. Just as we fought through a dense patch of brush, my flashlight swept over something that made me halt in my tracks. Metal, shiny, jagged, catching the moonlight. A trap. Mike bent down, his face pale as the beam revealed its cruel design. Steel jaws with sharp teeth, big enough to snap shut on a deer or a person. The mechanism was tied to a heavy log, rigged to crash down on anything unlucky enough to trigger it. Not for bears, Mike muttered, his voice grim. No, I said, my gut twisting. Poachers. The realization hit me hard. It explained the growls, the strange tension in the woods. We were not dealing with an animal at all. We had walked straight into human territory, and humans can be far more dangerous. That was when the bushes nearby rustled. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to get ready. Slowly, I lifted my flashlight and aimed it toward the sound. Out of the shadows stepped two men, their faces hidden under the hoods of their jackets. One carried a rifle slung over his shoulder. "Don't move!" Mike barked, his voice tight but commanding. The men froze, but you could see it in their stance. They were on edge, ready for anything. And in that moment, under the cold glow of our lights, I realized this night was about to take a turn none of us would ever forget. The beam of my flashlight held steady on the two figures, even though my hand wanted to shake. They stood just a few paces away, half hidden by the trees, their faces shadowed by the hoods pulled low. One of them had a rifle resting against his shoulder, casual but threatening. The other kept shifting from foot to foot like a man caught between fight and flight. "Easy now," I said, my voice rough. "We are park rangers. Nobody wants this to get ugly." The taller man tilted his head, his expression hard even in the dim light. He made no move to lower the gun. For a moment, the silence was unbearable. Just the sound of the wind stirring the branches above us and the echo of my own heartbeat in my ears. Mike raised his voice, firm but steady. "Put it down. Now." The man's hand drifted toward the rifle strap. My gut dropped like a stone. This was the kind of moment that could spiral out of control in seconds. I took a step forward, lifting my free hand in what I hoped was a calming gesture. "You don't want to do this," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You know what happens if you point that gun at us, nothing good. Let's not go there." For a long beat, nobody moved. Then the taller man let out a bitter laugh, the kind of sound that grated on your nerves. Slowly, he lowered the rifle, though he did not put it on the ground. His companion looked relieved, but he still had the nervous look of a man ready to bolt. "What are you doing out here?" I asked, though I already had a good idea. "This is our land," the tall one growled. "We hunt here. You people have no right to stop us." My jaw tightened. "Hunting is illegal in this park, you know that, and that trap?" I pointed to the metal jaws gleaming under the flashlight. "That's not just dangerous for animals. It's deadly for people too. You leave something like that out here, someone walking through could die." "The law doesn't mean a damn thing out here," he snapped. "We do what we have to in order to survive." The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. I could feel the tension like a wire stretched tight, ready to snap. We were unarmed, outnumbered, standing face to face with men who had nothing to lose. I swallowed hard and forced myself to soften my tone. "Look, nobody's trying to make this worse than it already is. We just want to make sure no one gets hurt. Why don't you come back with us to the station? We can talk it out there." The man barked another laugh. "You think we're stupid? You'll just lock us up." "Maybe," I admitted. "But if you stay out here, it's only a matter of time before someone else stumbles onto you. And when that happens, it won't go as easy. You have a chance right now to walk out of these woods without this turning into something worse." The two poachers exchanged a look. I could see the battle on their faces, pride on one side, self-preservation on the other. Finally, the taller man sighed through his teeth. "Fine, we'll go with you. But if this is some kind of trick..." "It's not," I cut in quickly. "Let's just head back." The walk out of the forest felt longer than any patrol I had ever done. The night pressed in around us, every shadow looking like it wanted to reach out and pull us in. The two men followed behind, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. None of us said a word. Every time I glanced back, their eyes were hard, their silence louder than any growl we had heard earlier. By the time we reached the truck, my nerves were frayed raw. The ride back to the ranger station was worse, tense and quiet, the men sitting stiff in the back seat like coiled springs. Mike drove while I kept an eye on them, ready for anything. At the station, deputies were waiting. The handoff was rough. The men fought at every step of the way, cursing, spitting, throwing their weight around like cornered animals. But in the end, they were booked, their weapons confiscated, their traps gathered as evidence. When it was all over, I stepped outside into the cool night air and let out a breath I had been holding for hours. Relief washed over me, but it was tangled up with something else, a sobering realization. The wilderness has a way of testing you. Sometimes that test comes in the form of a sudden storm, or a lost hiker needing rescue, or a wild animal stumbling too close to camp. But other times, the danger wears a human face. That night taught me something I never forgot. The forest is not just a place of peace and beauty. It can be a battlefield, a place where desperation and greed drive people to do terrible things. And as rangers, it is our duty to protect the land and the people who walk it, no matter the cost. Later, back at my cabin, I lay in bed listening to the wind sweep through the trees. I kept thinking about those men, about the way they looked at us like predators sizing up prey. I thought about the traps, the rifle, the growls that weren't really growls at all, but a warning that we weren't tea alone. It was a long time before I slept that night, and even now, whenever I hear a branch snap in the dark or a sound I cannot quite place, I think back to that fire, that growl, and those hooded faces stepping out of the shadows. The wilderness tests you, and sometimes it shows you just how dangerous people can be when they think no one is watching. I have seen a lot in my years working as a ranger, but nothing shakes a man quite like when someone you care about disappears into the wild. It all started on a hot summer evening when we got a call about a group of campers who had not returned from their hike. Missing persons reports were never something we took lightly, but this one felt different right from the start. The group had set out on a popular trail earlier that day, just a few miles in. Nothing extreme. Families hiked it all the time, but when the sun dipped low and their campsite sat empty, friends sounded the alarm. By the time I arrived at the trailhead with Ranger Sarah and 2 others, the sky was already darkening to that deep purple that comes just before night takes hold. We moved fast, flashlights in hand, calling out names into the trees. Every step forward carried that awful weight of knowing time was against us. People lost in the woods at night are at risk from everything: the cold, the terrain, even the animals that stir after sunset. But as we pressed deeper, it became clear we were not dealing with a simple case of hikers taking a wrong turn. The trail twisted through the dense forest, the branches overhead knitting together like fingers trying to block out the last scraps of light. Our beams cut across the path, catching little more than leaves and shadows. Then, almost without warning, Sarah raised her hand and whispered, "Do you hear that?" At first, all I caught was the rush of my own blood in my ears. Then it came. A faint sound drifting through the trees. Not footsteps, not the usual crack of branches, but a voice. A man's voice, low and sharp, speaking words I could not make out. We froze in place. Sarah and I exchanged a look. The kind of look that carries a whole conversation without saying a word. This was not just missing campers. Someone else was out there. We moved cautiously, following the sound, careful with our steps. The deeper we went, the stronger the voice grew, until it was joined by another and then another. Soon it was clear we were walking toward more than one person. The air grew heavy, like the forest itself was warning us to turn back. Sarah leaned close and whispered, "We need to radio this in." I nodded, but before we could, a sudden noise cracked through the night. A scream. High, piercing, full of fear. It cut straight to the bone. Without thinking, we broke into a run, flashlights bouncing wildly, our packs slamming against our backs. Branches whipped across our faces and arms, but we pushed through, desperate to reach the source. The scream cut off as suddenly as it had begun, replaced by silence so complete it rang in my ears. We burst into a small clearing, and that was when the world tilted. Sarah was gone. I spun around, heart pounding, shouting her name, my voice echoing off the trees. Nothing, no answer. Just empty darkness staring back at me. The other rangers spread out, sweeping their beams across the ground. That was when one of them cursed under his breath and pointed. Lying half buried in the dirt was Sarah's flashlight. The lens was cracked, the casing scuffed like it had been ripped from her hand. Beside it, faint marks cut into the soil, drag marks. Something or someone had pulled her away. My stomach dropped. I had seen my share of accidents in the backcountry, but this was no accident. This was deliberate. We fanned out, shouting, searching, hearts hammering against our ribs. Every minute that ticked by made the silence feel heavier, more suffocating. I could not stop picturing Sarah, fighting, struggling, being hauled into the trees by hands we had not seen. We followed the drag marks as far as we could, but they vanished into the undergrowth like the forest had swallowed them whole. The night pressed in tighter, our lights only reaching so far before the darkness consumed everything. I called it in, my voice steady even though my insides felt like they were breaking apart. Reinforcements were on the way, but deep down I knew we were running against the clock. Sarah was out there, somewhere in that vast wilderness, and she was not alone. As we regrouped, I could see the fear in the other rangers' eyes. None of us said it out loud, but we all felt the same thing. This was no ordinary search and rescue. Someone was out there, watching, waiting, and now they had one of our own. I stood in that clearing, clutching Sarah's broken flashlight in my hand, and made myself a promise. I would not leave these woods until I found her, no matter who or what I had to face. The forest had just turned from familiar ground into enemy territory, and I knew the real hunt was only beginning. The forest at night has a way of swallowing every sound, every shred of certainty. That night, standing in the clearing with Sarah's cracked flashlight in my hand, I felt more helpless than I ever had before. The air was cold and damp, my breath puffing white in the beams of our lanterns. I told myself over and over that she was alive, that she had to be, but the silence pressed against my skull like a weight. Within an hour, more rangers arrived, along with deputies from the county sheriff's office. They came with dogs, drones, and all the equipment you could imagine. But the wilderness has a cruel way of stripping all that down to nothing. A single misplaced step could erase a trail. A gust of wind could scatter every scent. It was a needle in a haystack kind of search, and time was slipping through our fingers. We fanned out in teams, combing the forest with precision, calling Sarah's name, hoping for an answer. The dogs caught a trace here and there, but it never lasted long. The undergrowth was thick, clawing at our legs, hiding everything. My throat felt raw from shouting, my ears straining for even the faintest reply. Then, sometime past midnight, one of the deputies called over the radio. "We've got something." I sprinted toward his position, stumbling over roots and rocks until I broke through to where his flashlight lit up a patch of dirt. There, lying in the leaves, was a backpack. Sarah's. I knew it instantly. The strap was frayed at the corner, just like I remembered. Beside it was something worse. A piece of rope, the kind you might use for camping, or for tying someone up. My stomach turned cold. Whoever had taken her knew these woods, knew how to move through them without being caught. The search pressed on, the forest alive with beams of light sweeping through the blackness. Hours bled together. Every crack of a branch made me spin, every rustle of leaves sent my heart hammering. More than once I thought I saw movement just at the edge of my vision, like shadows shifting just beyond the reach of our lights. Then it happened. One of the dogs barked hard, pulling its handler toward a dense thicket. We crashed through the brush, branches slapping against our faces, until the beam of my light struck something that stopped me cold. There she was, Sarah. She was tied to a tree, rope wound tight around her wrists, her face pale in the glow of our lights. For a split second I thought she might be gone, but then her eyes flicked open and she gasped, weak but alive. We swarmed her, cutting her free, voices tumbling over one another. "You're safe now, it's okay, we've got you." But Sarah's first words were not relief. Her voice shook as she whispered, "They're still here, they'll come back." That chilled me more than the night air ever could. Whoever had taken her had not run far. They were close, maybe even watching us at that very moment. We hustled Sarah back to the trail, our flashlights darting in every direction. Every crackle of leaves felt like footsteps on our heels. The deputies tightened their grip on their weapons. None of us spoke louder than a whisper. It felt like we were moving through someone else's territory, trespassers under invisible eyes. By dawn, Sarah was safe in the hands of medics, though shaken and bruised. She told us bits and pieces of what had happened. 2 men, faces hidden, armed, demanding money. They dragged her into the woods, tied her up, and argued about what to do next. But when they heard us closing in, they vanished. Law enforcement swept the area for days, but the men were ghosts. No footprints worth following, no camps, no discarded gear. Just silence and trees, as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. The park closed for a week and we tore it apart looking for answers. Nothing. Whoever those men were, they knew how to disappear. Sarah recovered, but she never came back to field duty after that. I do not blame her. That kind of terror leaves scars you cannot see. As for me, I still patrol these woods, but I do it with new eyes. Every time I step onto a trail, every time I hear the forest go quiet, I feel it. That prickling sense that someone could be out there, watching. I check campsites twice, sometimes 3 times, because I know now the real danger in the wilderness is not always the animals or the weather. Sometimes it is people, hiding in the dark, waiting for the right moment. Even years later, I cannot walk past a rope hanging in the gear shed without thinking of that night. I cannot stand in a clearing without scanning the tree line, wondering if unseen eyes are on me. The forest still holds its beauty, but for me, it also holds a shadow. I used to think of the wilderness as wild but fair, cold, sometimes cruel but honest in its danger. Now I know better. It can hide things, terrible things, and sometimes it chooses not to give them back. That night I learned something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. The scariest thing you can meet in the wild is not a bear, not a storm, not even the dark itself. It is another person.